Did Jack Ruby kill Lee Harvey Oswald because of his love for the president?
He thought that Kennedy would be the savior of the United States.
Did he kill Oswald for the CIA?
But it's obvious that he was doing this for someone. He was doing it for the Central Intelligence Agency.
Did he kill Oswald for the Mafia or to be a hero?
I think I would describe him as someone who was very close to many figures in the underworld.
Jack Ruby happened to be there at a moment of anger and passion. He always carried a gun.
Liars. They're lying.
All tonight on Crimes of the Century.
Sunday morning, Lee Harvey Oswald is being transferred from a Dallas jail. It will be a moment forever etched in history.
He's been shot. He's been shot. Lee Oswald has been shot. There's absolute panic.
The shooting of Lee Harvey Oswald by Jack Ruby shocked the nation already agonizing over the loss of its young president only 2 days before. But it was possibly more notorious in that it also became the first live murder on television, broadcast as it happened to more than 61 million viewers. It was the murder with millions of witnesses. Now, there could be no doubt that Jack Ruby killed Oswald, but many other doubts persist. Now, to try and understand how and why it happened, you should meet some of the people who knew Jack Ruby. Jerry Coley, the Dallas Morning News executive who was with Ruby only minutes prior to the Kennedy assassination. Levada Greer, the exotic dancer who worked at the Carousel, Ruby's Dallas nightclub. Seth Cantor, the White House correspondent who was only 10 feet away when Ruby fired the gun. Rabbi Hillel Silverman, Ruby's counselor and confidant. Melvin Belli, the celebrated attorney who was Ruby's first trial lawyer. James Lavelle, the Dallas detective handcuffed Oswald when Oswald was killed. And Earl Ruby, Jack's younger brother.
He was our family protector even way back when he was a teenager.
He reminded me of a child that was always looking in the bakery window, always on the outside looking in.
He was always searching for something, for status. He always wanted to be accepted. He always wanted to be recognized.
If he liked you, you could be a stranger, walk into his place and say, Jack, I'm hungry. I haven't had anything to eat. I don't have a place to sleep. He had never seen you before. He'd say, I'll feed you. He would feed him and give him a place to sleep. On the other hand, if he didn't like you, he would stick a knife in you.
He thought that Kennedy was wonderful. He thought that Kennedy would be the savior of the United States. He thought that Jack Kennedy was the greatest thing that had ever happened.
At 11:38 on Friday morning, November 22nd, 1963, President John F. Kennedy and his wife, Jackie, arrive at Love Field in Dallas aboard Air Force One. The motorcade carrying Kennedy and Texas Governor John Connally drives slowly through the streets of the city. At this moment, Jack Ruby is making his usual Friday visit to the local newspaper, placing a weekend ad for his Carousel Club.
Most of the time when he came down with his advertising, he gave his advertising and left after a short period of time. And this particular day, he lingered a couple of hours past that time. Yes, I do think it offered a very strong alibi.
At At 12:28, the motorcade heads toward Dealey Plaza. The Secret Service has advised the president to ride in a bubble-top limousine, but Kennedy chooses instead to ride in an open-air convertible. It is a fatal mistake. A Secret Service agent jumps on the limousine in a futile attempt to protect the life of the fallen leader. The shocked and confused crowd falls to the ground as police begin running toward the place where they think the shots are fired. They immediately converge on the Texas School Book Depository building. And where was Jack Ruby?
So I ran back down these 4 blocks to the news, into the news building, up here. Jack was still here. And I announced to John Newnham, that's the man that Jack was talking to, that the president had been shot. I didn't know how bad, what the disposition of the president was, but he had been shot. Jack got up and went directly to the corner office of our promotion manager at that time, and from that corner office you could look out and look directly down to the book depository. He picked the phone up and called someone, very distressed, and by that I was busy getting the photographer. As I got him lined up to go back with me, I noticed Jack was on the phone then out in the outer office, standing here by the window, sobbing, very upset.
Who was Jack Ruby calling, and why did he go directly to Parkland Hospital? Something he later denied.
I heard someone say, "Hello, Seth," and I turned around and it was Jack Ruby, and he was standing there with his hands stuck out. I mean, this didn't surprise me in the least, although the feeling I had was that others in that area were doctors and nurses. They were people dressed in white. And here was Jack Ruby all of a sudden. And he asked if I had any information about the president. And we shook hands, and I said that I really didn't know, but I was hoping to find out. And he said something to the effect about how terrible this is, and I agreed with him. And he said, "Do you think I should close my places of business out of respect for what's happened?" And I said, "Yes, Jack, I think that's a good idea, but you got to excuse me."
Ruby does indeed close his club for the weekend. Ironically, he never reopens it. Police searching the Texas School Book Depository easily find a rifle and shell casings they believe were used in the assassination. Soon, they capture Lee Harvey Oswald, an employee who worked in the building, charging him with killing a Dallas police officer.
Did you kill the president?
No, I've not been charged with that. In fact, nobody has said that to me yet. The first thing I heard about it was when the newspaper reporters in the hall asked me that question.
But President Kennedy is dead, and President Johnson is now en route to Washington. Later that night, Jack Ruby is photographed among newsmen at a police press conference. But a key question is raised. How could an owner of a strip joint take part in a press conference inside a tightly secured police building?
Jack Ruby knew policemen. As a matter of fact, police and journalists were his great heroes. He said they had class. He always used the word class. They were respected, they had class. He would give them passes, police and journalists, especially police, to his Carousel nightclub.
Now, this may not sound delightful, but we wanted Jack Ruby to get our cameras where we couldn't get him. We wanted him to find out information so we could quickly get it on the air. It was not only competitive, but I mean, it was the only story, and we wanted to tell the only story as well as we knew how. And Jack Ruby was one way we could do it.
He could get into any place, into the chief of police's office. If there were a meeting, the president or somebody else, everything was closed off. There would be a yellow line across there. Jack would come in over the yellow line, and the people would say, "Let Jack in, he's one of us." Because he just had ingratiated himself to everyone.
But is Ruby's relationship with the police merely cordial, or does he use his special access to stalk Oswald and wait for his chance to kill him? It's an opportunity that comes on Sunday morning at the Dallas Police and Courts building. Chief Jesse Curry had earlier promised that Oswald would be transferred to a higher security jail at 10 a.m. that morning.
We hope so, but I couldn't say positive at this time that they will be. On Main Street, just 1 block away from police headquarters, from where Oswald is about to be transferred, Jack Ruby enters a Western Union office. He will wire money to one of his strippers who is in desperate need of cash.
Well, it could be just luck of the draw that caused Captain Fritz to assign myself and Mr. Graves to the transfer of Lee Harvey Oswald.
Because of delays and last-minute changes in plans, Detective Lavelle begins the transfer of his prisoner Oswald at approximately 11:16. It will be a short journey, an elevator ride from the 5th floor cell block to the basement of the police building. Reporters who have been told the transfer was to happen an hour earlier are on the alert. It is fact that Ruby sent a time-dated $25 money order to stripper Little Lynn at exactly 11:17, and Lee Harvey Oswald has just 4 minutes to live.
We had several threatening calls saying that they were going to take Oswald out and shoot him or string him up and do all these bad things to him. 99 times out of 100, there's not any overt effort ever made to carry out any of these threats. They're strictly that, just threats. So I wasn't particularly concerned about it.
Ruby leaves Western Union carrying $2,300 in cash and the .38 caliber revolver he always takes when he's holding money. But then something happens. He changes his mind and turns toward the police building. And Jack Ruby begins his 83-second walk into infamy.
Well, he told me that, first of all, he wouldn't have been there if he hadn't made a U-turn. I don't know why he made the U-turn, but he made the U-turn, and when he went by the police station, he noticed a crowd. In addition, the media had put out the word that Oswald would be moved at 10 o'clock. Here it was 11 o'clock. He didn't expect to see him. He should have been gone by then.
Is it a mere coincidence that Ruby turns to the police station, as his brother says? Or does he have some special knowledge about the transfer of Oswald? And does Ruby know that there will be a 30-second lapse of police security that would allow him easy access?
I recall somebody saying, "Hey, there's Ruby. What the hell is he doing there?" But I mean, it wasn't, "Hey, what's he doing there?" It was, "My God, the guy is every place."
I made a remark to Oswald, more in jest than anything else. I said, "Lee, if anybody shoots at you, I hope that they're as good a shot as you are," meaning that I hope they hit him and not me. He kind of laughed and he said, "Nobody's going to shoot at me." I had no idea that how soon those words were going to come true.
He's been shot. Lee Oswald has been shot. There's the man with a gun.
What happened then, of course, was a blur of activity. Several detectives pounced on him at once. One of the detectives yelled out, "Jack, you son of a bitch." The policeman up at the top of the Main Street ramp wheeled around with his revolver pulled, facing all of us, saying, "Anybody moves and I shoot."
I saw Jack Ruby as he stepped out of the crowd with my peripheral vision with the pistol at his side. But it only took about a second and a half for him to step out and get off that shot. My hand is on the belt. I'm handcuffed to his left hand, and I try to pull back on him. And Mr. Graves was able to grab the gun hand of Jack Ruby, and his thumb locked over the hammer of the pistol so that he could not fire any other shot.
Ironically, moments after Oswald makes his fateful trip from the 5th floor cell block to the basement, Jack Ruby reverses those steps as the jail's newest prisoner.
Oswald never said anything other than the original when he was shot, and he groaned and moved a little bit and then completely relaxed. During the entire trip, I was holding a pulse on his wrist, trying to get a pulse rate on him, and was unable to reach any kind of a pulse rate.
And then when they said that Jack Ruby had done the shooting, I said, "Oh no, that's not the right person. Wrong person."
to see someone who I had considered to be a rather innocuous man about town involving himself in quite likely the murder of the century. I was absolutely stunned.
Well, I said, Jack, I've known you for a number of years, and you've never done anything to intentionally hurt an officer. But I said, you did not do us any favor when you shot Oswald. He said, Lavelle, all I wanted to do was be a hero. And he said, looks like I just fouled things up good. I said, well, you can certainly say that again.
After President Kennedy's funeral on November 25th, Americans focused their attention on Jack Ruby and why he shot Oswald. Did he act alone, or was there a conspiracy? There are many opinions.
My first question to him was, Jack, why did you do it? He said, I just couldn't bear the thought of it, and I did what every American would have done. I happened to be carrying my gun, I saw him, I was near him, I pulled the trigger.
He told me when he entered the police station, as soon as he got down to where they were bringing Oswald out, as soon as he came to front to see Oswald, Oswald had a smirk and a smile on his face as they were bringing him out, a detective on each side, and that just triggered him off. He just couldn't take it, and he pulled out his gun and shot him. That's what he told me.
In the flash of a second and the pulling of a trigger, Jack Ruby had thrown himself on the cutting edge of history, and history would not be kind. It was an impossible situation, and Ruby needed a lawyer to handle his case. On November 27th, just 3 days after Ruby shot Oswald, Jack Ruby's brother reached for a star. The flamboyant San Francisco trial attorney, Melvin Belli.
He probably, as I first saw him, was mentally estranged from reality. I still believe that, but I don't think he was guilty, not guilty by reason of insanity. And if you come close to being not guilty by reason of insanity, that doesn't make it. And it didn't make it in this case.
Belli felt that Ruby could not get a fair trial in Dallas. He petitioned for a change of venue. It was denied, and Ruby's lawyers would later appeal the ruling.
As the trial went on, he seemed to shrink into himself more and more. He became quieter. He seemed to become smaller in stature. He seemed to withdraw himself even more. It came to the point that he was almost unnoticeable, and we began almost to forget him in the courtroom.
Belli tried to get Jack acquitted by proving he was legally insane at the moment of the shooting. But the Dallas jury took less than 3 hours to decide that Jack Ruby was guilty of premeditated murder, and he would pay with his life.
Bill Alexander, the assistant district attorney, pranced down the hallway and made a gesture like that with a noose. It was such a garish thing that I didn't think a human being could act like that. But then I'd forgot for the moment that I was in Dallas.
The verdict was appealed, and Ruby won. On October 5th, 1966, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals overturned the verdict and ordered a new trial. But less than 3 months later, on January 3rd, 1967, Jack Ruby was dead. Cause of death? Cancer.
He now knew he was going to die. He had cancer, and he had the blood clot, and he felt he was going to die. And I tried to talk him out of it. During that few minutes, I thought I'd better ask him if he ever knew Oswald. And I did ask him. I said, did you ever know Oswald at all? Did he ever come into the club that you knew of? And he says, absolutely not. Are you nuts? And I never saw him alive again.
But even after Ruby's death, conspiracy theories thrived, some even sparked by Ruby himself after he was arrested.
Complete conspiracy, Watson. If you knew the true facts, you'd be amazed at it. In what way? It'll be proven in a few days later what the charges will be filed against me, plus the fact of the assassination. Complete conspiracy against me, right?
1 week after Kennedy's death, President Johnson appointed the Warren Commission to investigate the assassination, including Ruby's involvement. While some believe the commission rushed to its judgment, the report remains as the official public record.
President Johnson had an election coming up in November of 1964, And he certainly urged the Chief Justice to get things wound up as soon as possible.
Since that time, some have pursued a number of still unsubstantiated criminal theories. For 22 years, attorney Mark Lane has argued that Ruby was simply allowed to kill Oswald.
Jack Ruby killed Lee Harvey Oswald with the complicity of the Dallas Police Department. He may have thought in his mind this was a great patriotic act because the Dallas Police had told him that you'll be a hero.
Since 1967, Judge Garrison has claimed that it was the CIA behind the deaths of Kennedy and Oswald.
But it's obvious that he was doing this for someone. He was doing it for the Central Intelligence Agency.
The Warren Commission did not want the American people to know the truth about who killed President Kennedy. Therefore, they did not want the American people to know the truth about why Lee Harvey Oswald was killed.
I think that the Warren Commission, failed to look into Jack Ruby's deepest connections with the underworld and underworld figures, many of them of long standing.
This was a coup d'etat. The reason for it was to change the foreign policy which had been inaugurated by John Kennedy. The foreign policy prior to the arrival of John Kennedy under President Truman and under President Eisenhower had been evolved into the Cold War. And Kennedy was steadily, systematically ending the Cold War. Kennedy was killed by powerful forces engineered by the Central Intelligence Agency, which wanted the Cold War continued.
Officially, the Warren Commission said that Oswald acted alone and fired the gun with 3 bullets from the book depository. But after all these years, there are some who persist in challenging the lone assassin theory.
According to the Warren Commission, the magic bullet entered the back of President Kennedy and then came up inside his chest and exited his throat and then went down under the right armpit of Governor Connolly, came out just below the right nipple of his chest, went down through his right wrist, came out breaking up the lateral bone, the major bone in the wrist, came out of the bottom of the right wrist and entered into his left thigh, and at some point fell out after causing those 7 wounds.
Which theory do you believe? All of them? None of them? Well, perhaps you have a theory of your own. Many people do. But there is one thing that rings painfully true about the case of Jack Ruby. Whether intentionally or not, when Jack Ruby shot Lee Harvey Oswald, he succeeded in committing a crime of historic proportions. And he forever silenced perhaps the only person who could tell us the missing pieces and people in the unsolved puzzle of the killing of John Fitzgerald Kennedy. A true crime of the century.
There is Lee Oswald.
Though there are still dozens of unanswered questions about this crime, one man believes there was a simple reason for it all.
One statement I'd like to make. I know my brother so well, and knowing that he loved the president and loved the president's family, that if Jack really was involved in any conspiracy to kill President Kennedy, I would be willing to pull the lever on the electric chair. That's how well I know he had no part in any conspiracy.